Okay, so you want to own a pharmacy. Good news. It sells the one product human beings will always need, regardless of the economy, the weather, or their mood: medicine. People don't decide whether to fill a prescription the way they decide whether to eat out this week. They just fill it. There are roughly 60,000 pharmacies in the United States, and for most of the last century, owning one of them was considered about as safe a bet as a small business could be. Steady customers, repeat visits, a product nobody negotiates on. It sounds like the last recession-proof business left. It is not. Over 3,000 retail pharmacies closed in a single recent year, not from lack of customers. Most of them were busy, right up until the day they shut the doors. The prescriptions were still coming in. The shelves were still stocked. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a pharmacy actually makes its money, because it's almost never from the medicine itself. You'll understand why a pharmacy can fill hundreds of prescriptions a day and still lose money doing it. And you'll understand the one relationship that quietly decides whether a pharmacy survives or closes. A relationship the owner never gets to negotiate. It isn't the drugs. It isn't the customers. It's a contract most pharmacists never get to read before they're forced to sign it. Let's start with what it costs to get in. Opening an independent pharmacy typically costs somewhere between $200,000 and $1 million, depending on the location, the size of the space, and how much inventory you're carrying on day one. A modest neighborhood pharmacy might get open for around $500,000. A larger one, and with a drive-through and a full retail front, can run well past that. And unlike most small businesses, a huge share of that number just sits on the shelf. Inventory alone can eat up a third or more of your total startup cost because you're not stocking a few dozen products. You're stocking thousands of medications, many of which need to be paid for before insurance ever reimburses you a dollar. You're financing other people's healthcare weeks in advance of getting paid for it. Then there's the license itself. A pharmacist has to be a licensed professional to run the counter. Years of training, a board exam, ongoing continuing education, which is its own barrier to entry that most small businesses simply don't have, which is why a lot of people buy an existing pharmacy instead of building one. You inherit the patient files, the relationships with local doctors, the insurance contracts already in place. And that's where the pricing gets interesting. A profitable independent pharmacy with strong prescription volume can sell for several $1 million if it's doing real revenue. One recent listing for a single location pharmacy filling around 100,000 prescriptions a year priced the business at over $8 million. But revenue is doing a lot of hiding in that number. Because in a pharmacy, more than almost any other retail business, the money coming in the door is not the money you get to keep. And if you want to understand what's actually happening underneath businesses that look simple from the outside, this channel takes them apart every week. Subscribe, and you'll start reading receipts a little differently. But first, what are you actually selling? Here's the part almost nobody outside the industry understands. When you buy a prescription, you're not really buying it from the pharmacy. You're buying it through the pharmacy, from a price that a third party set before you ever walked in. Roughly 9 out of every 10 prescriptions filled in the country today are for generic drugs. And on paper, generics are where a pharmacy is supposed to make its money, because they cost the pharmacy very little to buy. But what the pharmacy actually gets paid for filling that prescription isn't decided by the pharmacy. It's decided by an insurance middleman most patients have never heard of. And that reimbursement can be higher than the drug cost, roughly the same as the drug cost, or, more often than most people would guess, lower than what the pharmacy paid to have the medicine on the shelf in the first place. Which means every single prescription that comes through the door has to be evaluated individually, not for whether it helps the patient, for whether filling it loses the pharmacy money. That's not a hypothetical. Pharmacists across the country now describe checking prescription by prescription, which ones are profitable and which ones aren't. because the wrong mix on the wrong day can quietly put the business underwater. So, where's the actual profit? It's spread across everything sitting around the counter: the greeting cards, the vitamins, the seasonal aisle, the cosmetics. General retail margins in the 20 to 30% range compared to prescription margins that can run in the low single digits or negative. Vaccines and clinical services, blood pressure checks, flu shots, basic screenings often pay better per visit than the medications themselves. And loyalty. A pharmacy that becomes the place a family has trusted for 20 years earns something a chain across town can't easily buy: patients who won't switch even when it would save them money. A well-run independent pharmacy isn't really in the business of dispensing pills. It's in the business of being trusted enough that people keep coming back and using everything around the counter to make that trust worth keeping the doors open for. So, what does the person who owns one actually take home? Here's where it splits hard. Overall, pharmacy profit margins tend to sit under 3% once you account for the full mix of prescriptions and reimbursements, thin enough that a bad month of unfavorable claims can wipe out a good one almost entirely. A pharmacy generating a few $100,000 a year in revenue might net its owner a modest, livable income after payroll and rent. A high-volume pharmacy doing 8 or 9 figures in prescription revenue can produce a genuinely serious income. But the owner is managing a business with almost no control over its single biggest input: what it gets paid per prescription. That's the strange part of this business. Revenue can look enormous, and profit can still be razor thin, because so much of what comes in the door immediately goes back out to the people who supplied the drug and the people who decided what you'd get paid for dispensing it. Here's a question worth sitting with, because it says a lot about this business. Would you rather own the pharmacy or own the company that decides what every pharmacy in the state gets reimbursed? Hold that thought. By the end of this, one of those is going to look a great deal more powerful than the other, which brings us to the thing sitting under the entire business. Not the rent, though rent matters. Not the license, though the license matters too. The thing that decides, prescription by prescription, whether the pharmacy makes or loses money on almost everything it sells. The PBM pharmacy benefit managers are the middlemen sitting between your pharmacy, the insurance company, and the drug manufacturer. They set the reimbursement rate the pharmacy receives for every prescription filled under nearly every insurance plan in the country. And the pharmacy has essentially no seat at that table. You don't negotiate the rate. You're handed a contract, take it, or refuse to serve that insurer's patients at all, which for most neighborhoods isn't really a choice. And it gets worse than a flat low rate. Pharmacists in multiple states have described losing tens of thousands of dollars a year to fees, sometimes called transaction fees, sometimes called effective rate adjustments, charged on every claim submitted on top of reimbursement rates that can already sit below what the pharmacy paid for the drug. Some of these fees arrive retroactively, months after the prescription was filled, quietly reducing a payment the pharmacy already counted as revenue. One independent pharmacist in Michigan calculated that in a single year, he filled prescriptions at a loss 1,800 separate times, over $25,000 handed back to patients and medicine that cost him more than he was paid to provide it. And here's the part that makes it stranger. Several of the largest PBMs in the country are owned by the same corporate parent as a major pharmacy chain, which means the company setting your reimbursement rate can also own the pharmacy down the street competing with you for the same customer. And reports from federal regulators have found these companies steering the most profitable prescriptions toward their own affiliated pharmacies, while independents are left with the leftovers. You can run the most trusted, best located, highest volume pharmacy in the neighborhood and still watch your margins evaporate because a company you've never met, in a state you don't operate in, decided your reimbursement rate should drop this quarter. This is the number one killer of independent pharmacies. And it almost never shows up in the pitch. There's a second, quieter pressure sitting underneath it. As rural and urban pharmacies alike close, the areas losing them are increasingly becoming what public health researchers call pharmacy deserts. And the same closures tend to hit low-income and rural communities hardest. The places that could least afford to lose the only pharmacy in town. So, is owning a pharmacy worth it? Here's the honest version. As a model, it is one of the most essential, recession-resistant businesses that exists. People will always need their medicine, and a trusted local pharmacy earns a kind of loyalty most businesses can only dream about. But it is not the safe bet it looks like from the outside. It's not the prescriptions, and it's not the customers walking through the door. It's a reimbursement contract you didn't write, controlled by a company you don't work for, deciding, prescription by prescription, whether today was profitable. The independent pharmacies still standing understand. They're not really competing on medicine anymore. They're competing on trust, on services that chains won't bother offering, and on managing a margin that someone else gets to move without asking. If that's a business you'd respect rather than romanticize, you'll want the rest of this series, because every one of these businesses people assume are simple hides, the same kind of buried math underneath. Subscribe, and next time we open one up, you'll already know where to look. Next week, we get into a business that looks like pure convenience. The car wash, where the machines do the work and somehow the real money isn't in the wash at all. I'll see you then.